Thank you for joining Detective Duo, your companion for stories of wit, charm, and quiet suspense, the kind Tommy and Tuppence might have uncovered in their early adventures. Subscribe for more of these mysteries, and let us know where you're listening from. Tuppence Beresford had always believed that office furniture behaved worse than suspects. A suspect could be coaxed, cornered, or, in desperate cases, bribed with scones. A desk, on the other hand, refused to budge so much as an inch when one required it to shift gracefully across the floor. At precisely 12:30, she stood in the middle of their small Bloomsbury office, hands on hips, glaring at a filing cabinet that had developed a stubborn loyalty to its patch of carpet. "This is mutiny," she announced. "I refuse to tolerate insolence from furniture. It's positively anti-woman." The cabinet, unmoved both physically and emotionally, offered no reply. Tuppence bent, pushed, grunted, and declared in increasingly dramatic stages that the entire office was designed by a saboteur. A stack of case files, carefully balanced on the swivel chair, teetered in protest. She lunged to steady them, knocking her elbow sharply against the edge of the desk. "Oh, marvellous," she muttered, wincing. "If I don't sprain something by tea time, it will be a medical miracle." The bell above the street door gave a single chiming tremor, but it was merely the draft. The door itself remained closed. The files wobbled again, issuing a clear warning. Tuppence glared at them, as though she had caught a gang of burglars mid-escape. At that moment, the real door swung inward, and Tommy Beresford stepped into the office wearing the expression of a man who had spent his entire morning interviewing particularly dull wallpaper. "I bring news," he said, removing his hat and coat with exaggerated care. "Absolutely none. Not a shred. Not a sliver. The missing cousin we were hired to locate has apparently joined a monastery that specializes in silence. I envy him." "You should also envy my strength of character," Tuppence returned, sweeping hair from her forehead. "I'm performing battle with this cabinet, and I refuse to lose." "Did you try persuasion?" "I tried threats. They were more honest." Tommy opened his mouth to add something sardonic, but his gaze drifted past her toward the street-facing window. Someone stood on the pavement outside, someone who had not been there a moment ago. "Well," Tommy murmured, "that's new." Tuppence turned, brushing dust from her sleeve. A stranger lingered just beyond the window pane, studying their sign, Beresford Investigation Services, with the solemnity of a man appraising a royal crest. He was strikingly overdressed for Bloomsbury midday, a long, tailored coat of charcoal grey, perfectly pressed trousers, immaculate gloves, and a moustache that must have required both skill and ambition. A polished, silver-handled cane rested lightly in his grasp, as if it were a sceptre. More peculiar still, he appeared to be waiting for applause. "I don't care for that moustache," Tuppence said immediately. "It looks like it knows secrets." Tommy collected himself. "Shall we invite the moustache inside, or wait for it to deliver a monologue?" The question proved unnecessary. The stranger tapped once on the glass with his cane, then strode through the door as if making an entrance onto a stage. "Mr. Thomas Beresford," he boomed, spreading his arms as though announcing a reunion long rehearsed. "It is I, Lucius Carroway, your former mentor." Tuppence dropped the box of files. They hit the floor with a shattering papery sigh. Tommy blinked. "My what?" Carroway smiled with satisfied benevolence. He possessed the confidence of a man who had spent decades crafting an image polished enough to reflect sunlight. "My dear boy," he continued, "surely you haven't forgotten the countless hours I spent shaping your investigative instincts, preparing you for life among puzzles, pitfalls, and peril." Tommy considered this carefully. "I've never seen you before in my life." Carroway clasped a hand to his heart, a modesty so profound that it verges on impolite. "You were young, impressionable, a fledgling detective in need of guidance, and I, Lucius Carroway, provided it." Tuppence stepped forward with a polite but sceptical smile. "How very noble of you. Do feel free to provide the dates, locations, and any witnesses who might confirm this dazzling mentorship." Carroway's smile faltered only slightly. "Ah, well, memory is a curious beast, Mrs. Beresford." He gave a small bow. "Mrs. Beresford, yes. I see the partnership is as formidable as I suspected." Tuppence folded her arms, a posture that had unsettled greater villains than Carroway. Indeed, and we prefer facts to suspicions. Carraway reached inside his coat with a dramatic flourish and produced a worn leather notebook. Its pages were yellowed and filled with tightly scrawled symbols, diagrams, and shorthand notations. He opened it just wide enough for them to glimpse the pages, then snapped it shut again like a magician hiding his trick. "I have returned," he said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial murmur, "to reclaim what is mine." Tommy raised a brow. "And that would be?" "Your exceptional talents," Carraway declared, "and perhaps a debt or two that time has not erased." "Fascinating," Tuppence said dryly, "because my husband's talents appear to stem from hard work, quick wit, and an impressive ability to avoid stepping on rakes, not from mysterious strangers with theatrical moustaches." Carraway ignored the jab. He strolled casually across the room, his gaze sweeping the office with an intensity quite at odds with his flamboyant manner. He paused a fraction too long near the locked cupboard, then drifted past the desk, noting drawer positions, metal fittings, corners. Tuppence noticed. "It seems you're very interested in our furniture," she remarked. Carraway flashed a charming, utterly unconvincing smile. "Old habit. An investigator's eye never dulls. Every drawer, every hinge, they whisper things if you know how to listen." "I'm more concerned," Tommy said evenly, "with the things that talk too loudly." Carraway's hand tightened slightly on his cane. For a fleeting moment, his expression hardened, a brief, raw edge of something sharp beneath the polished surface, but it vanished at once. "I shall not impose further," he said, stepping toward the door, "but you will hear from me again soon. Matters of consequence are stirring in London, Mr. Beresford, matters that concern your past and your future." He tipped his hat, pivoted neatly on his heel, and swept out of the office. The bell above the door jangled in his wake. Tuppence exhaled. "Tommy, who on earth was that?" "I've truly no idea," Tommy replied, "but I dislike being assigned random mentors without prior notice." She crouched to gather the spilled files. "He is either a harmless egotist with a flair for drama, or the type who steals silver spoons and blames the butler. I vote for something in between." Tommy went to the window, watching Carraway stride away down the pavement with the crisp energy of a man who had just set a plan in motion. "And did you notice how he inspected the office? He wasn't admiring our decor." "Obviously not. No one admires that cabinet." Just as Tommy turned away, a man passing on the pavement slowed, glanced toward him, then muttered under his breath in a tone low enough that only Tommy caught it. "Bad omen," the man said. "That fellow returning to London. Bad omen for anyone with valuables." He didn't stop walking, didn't look back, didn't offer clarification. Tommy remained at the window long after the man disappeared into the Bloomsbury crowd. Something in the notebook Carraway had flaunted, something about the symbols, the deliberate secrecy, had triggered a faint but undeniable recognition, not of the man himself, but of danger dressed in theatrics. Tuppence joined him, brushing dust from her skirt. "What now?" Tommy rested his hands in his pockets. "Now," he said slowly, "we determine whether Mr. Lucius Carraway is a deluded old peacock or a very clever fox." "And you think we can tell the difference?" "I think," he said, "we're about to find out." The clock ticked in the quiet office, a small, steady heartbeat marking the beginning of trouble. Evening descended upon the Bloomsbury office with the faintest creak of the floorboards, a sign, Tuppence insisted, that the building itself held opinions about their line of work. She had made tea, though the teapot gave the impression it resented the effort. Tommy perched on the arm of a chair while Tuppence paced near the window, arms folded, expression sharpened to a point. "Right," she announced. "I want an explanation. A proper one, mind you. Not one of your breezy, I haven't the faintest idea lines." Tommy sighed. "Tuppence, for the 100th time, I don't know Lucius Carraway. If I did, I would remember a moustache like that. It could frighten small children." "That's not the point," she said, tapping one finger thoughtfully against her chin. "He walked in here with a notebook, a cane, and an ego roughly the size of Surrey. And he claimed he trained you. In what, exactly? Dramatic entrances?" Tommy slid off the arm of the chair and moved toward the desk, retrieving the memory of Carraway's notebook, the peculiar scrawl, the cryptic diagrams. Whatever he's playing at, it isn't a harmless prank. "Well," Tuppence said briskly, We're not guessing, we're examining. She pulled a fresh notebook from the drawer. Let's reconstruct what we saw. Tommy smiled faintly. Going full detective mode, are we? Don't mock. I'm excellent at visual recall. She sat down, flipping the notebook open. First page he showed us. A circle divided into segments, yes? And something that looked like a key? I saw symbols, Tommy replied, nearly like the shorthand used during wartime inventory transfers. Tuppence paused mid-scribble. Inventory, as in supplies, or items of value? Could be either, but Carraway emphasized reclaiming what is his. That phrasing didn't feel metaphorical. Tuppence narrowed her eyes. You think he's after something physical? Something stolen? Something hidden? I think, Tommy said, lowering himself into the chair opposite her, that Carraway's theatrics hide something far less flamboyant, something calculated. Before she could reply, the office door cracked open and Albert stuck his head in, hat still on, eyes wide. I say, you two all right? Only I've just had a queer moment in the back corridor. Tuppence straightened. What sort of queer? Albert stepped in, shutting the door behind him as though afraid of being overheard. Someone tried the latch. Not the front, mind, the rear one. Gave it a good go, too. I heard the metal strain just a bit. Tommy stood. Did you see anyone? Albert nodded. I did. Tall fellow, silver tip on his cane. Same shine as the chap who came in earlier. He didn't try to hide it, well, not until he saw me. Then off he went, quick as anything. Tuppence and Tommy exchanged a look. She murmured, exploratory, testing us. Measuring our vulnerabilities more like, Tommy added. Albert cleared his throat. Nothing stolen. Least, nothing I can tell. But I didn't fancy him nosing about. Good work, Albert, Tommy said. Go home for tonight, and keep your eyes open. Albert nodded gravely and left. Tuppence turned to Tommy. So Carraway returns, offers theatrics, and then tests our back entrance. That's not ego. That's reconnaissance. Tommy reached for the telephone on the side table. We need information, real information. There's one person who'll know the truth behind Carraway's reputation. Which one of your disreputable old contacts is this? Tuppence asked. Major Swithin. Tommy dialed. He's retired, but he still knows every colourful character from the old intelligence circles. The line clicked, buzzed, then connected. Hello? Came a voice thick with supper wine. Major, Tommy Beresford here. A laugh burst down the line. Beresford, good man. Good man. Still chasing shadows? Or have you finally taken up gardening? Afraid not. I need your expertise. What do you know about a man called Lucius Carraway? There was a pause. Then, unexpectedly, the Major roared with laughter. Carraway. Good heavens, you've met him. Oh, splendid, absolutely splendid. Splendid isn't the word I'd use, Tommy said. Who is he? A nuisance, the Major replied fondly. A flamboyant nuisance. He used to claim he trained every promising agent in London. Had a habit of turning up where he wasn't wanted. A bit of a magpie, too. Valuables had a way of relocating themselves when Carraway was nearby, but nothing ever proven. Tuppence leaned in closer to the phone. Tommy adjusted the receiver so she could hear. So, he was a thief? She asked. Oh no, not proven. Never caught. Just appeared to have coincidences wherever he strolled. Any chance he's dangerous? Tommy asked. Only socially, the Major chuckled. But if he's sniffing around you, I'd watch your pockets. And your silverware. Tommy replaced the receiver. Tuppence sat back, absorbing the information. So, a self-important fraud with nimble fingers? Perhaps, Tommy said. But Carraway didn't strike me as a man chasing petty silver. He had a purpose, and that notebook, he didn't flash it for admiration. He wanted us to see it. Tuppence nodded, and his gaze kept drifting toward the drawers. He wasn't reminiscing. He was evaluating. Tommy lifted the lamp from the desk and tilted it, casting the room in a softer glow. Let's try to remember more of the notebook. Together they reconstructed symbols, interconnected lines, initials beside lists, small markings like tally strokes. Tuppence frowned. Some of these look like object codes, she said. Catalogue shorthand, museum style. Tommy's brow furrowed. Then the notebook might not be his invention. It could be a record someone else made. Someone he took it from, she suggested. Or someone he works with, Tommy countered. Before either could theorize further, a soft sliding sound drifted from the hallway. Not the knock of a visitor, but something lighter, something secretive. Tuppence rose at once. "Someone's at the door." Tommy reached the corridor first, but the doorway was empty. Only the faint scent of cigarette smoke lingered, not Tuppence's brand, nor Tommy's. On the floor lay a sealed envelope. Tuppence bent, picked it up, and examined the flap. Unmarked, hand-delivered. "Inside," Tommy said, "or outside?" "Just inside," as if someone slipped it under the door, then walked away. She brought it into the office and set it beneath the lamplight. The envelope was ordinary cream paper, the handwriting on the front deliberately inconsistent, as though someone had tried masking their natural hand. Tuppence opened it carefully. Inside lay a single torn page, unmistakably from Carraway's notebook. The edge was jagged, as if ripped in haste. The scribbles were harsher, tighter, more frantic than the pages Carraway had displayed earlier. Beneath the symbols, a line had been scrawled in urgent, uneven strokes. "You're being watched. Don't trust him." Tuppence's breath caught. This isn't Carraway's handwriting. Tommy studied it. It's someone warning us, someone who had access to his notebook. Or someone he stole it from, Tuppence added quietly. She turned the page over, nothing on the back. Yet the paper trembled slightly in her hand, carrying the imprint of hurried danger. Tommy looked toward the darkened corridor. Someone else is involved, someone close enough to trail him. "And afraid enough," Tuppence murmured, "to risk slipping us this." She laid the torn page on the desk, smoothing it carefully. The office felt suddenly different, less like their haven of banter and bickering, and more like the outer perimeter of something shifting, something unseen. Tuppence tapped a finger lightly on the page. "Tommy, whatever Carraway wants, whoever he is, he's not alone." Tommy nodded, jaw tightening. "And neither," he said, "are we." The lamplight flickered. The torn sheet lay between them, the first true echo of danger. Morning crept into the Bloomsbury office, not with sunshine, but with the sound of the brass letter slot snapping shut. Tuppence looked up from the torn notebook page she had been studying for the past 10 minutes. Tommy, halfway through stirring sugar into his first cup of tea, gave a faint groan. "If that's another advertisement for patent carpet cleaner," he muttered, "I shall switch careers." "It's not footsteps," Tuppence said thoughtfully. "Not the weight of a postman either." "Ah," Tommy replied, "so we're judging threats by footfall now." But when she opened the door, the person waiting on the front step was neither postman nor threat, at least not the kind one could recognize immediately. She was a thin, elegant woman in a black coat, her hands clasped tightly around a silver locket. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as though grief had kept her awake for months. "Mrs. Beresford?" the woman asked softly. Tuppence nodded. "Do come in." The widow stepped over the threshold with the hesitant grace of someone who feared the floor might collapse beneath her. Tommy set aside his tea and stood. "Mrs. Eliza Marchbank," the woman said, offering a tremulous smile. I hope you'll forgive my early call. I had nowhere else to turn." "Please sit," Tuppence said gently. "Take your time." But Mrs. Marchbank clutched the locket more tightly, as though afraid it might vanish if her fingers loosened. "It's my husband," she began. "My late husband, rather. He passed away 6 months ago. He was a researcher at the Museum of Antiquities. Not an important man, but meticulous. Very meticulous." Tommy settled opposite her. "And something has happened?" Mrs. Marchbank nodded. "His safe was broken into 2 nights ago." Tuppence leaned forward. "What was taken?" "Only a single page from his research diary." "Just one?" Tommy asked. "Yes, only one. The thief went straight to it, as if he knew exactly what he wanted." Mrs. Marchbank swallowed. "But here is the peculiar thing. He seemed almost disappointed, as though he expected to find something else." Tuppence exchanged a brief glance with Tommy. That detail aligned disturbingly well with their own encounter the previous evening. "Can you describe the intruder?" Tuppence asked. Mrs. Marchbank hesitated, then whispered, "Tall, well-dressed, carried a walking cane, silver at the tip." Tommy felt the quiet click of inevitability in his chest. Carraway again. "And you're certain nothing else was touched?" he asked. I've checked everything. My husband's files, his notes, his personal items. They're intact. Only that missing diary page. Tuppence's voice remained calm, but her eyes had sharpened. Mrs. Marchbank, may we ask what your husband was researching? The widow drew a steadying breath. He specialized in verifying provenance during wartime transfers. There were confusions. Items moved between hands, crates relabeled, documents rewritten. My husband believed some artifacts had been acquired under questionable circumstances. He kept a private list of them while he checked and cross-referenced. Tommy leaned back slowly. A list of questionable acquisitions and an intruder seeking a missing diary page. His tone was neutral, but Tuppence could almost hear the cogs turning. Mrs. Marchbank nodded miserably. I fear someone may be trying to erase the trail he uncovered. Tuppence reached out, her hand brushing lightly against the silver locket. Your husband kept this in the safe? No, the widow said quickly. This is mine. It was a wedding gift. I brought it because I didn't know where else to keep it. The break-in frightened me. Tuppence examined the locket. It was beautiful, old silver, delicately engraved, but there was an oddity to its shape, a subtle asymmetry that suggested it might once have been attached to something else. A hinge that was a shade too broad, a curve too deliberate. May I? Tuppence asked. Mrs. Marchbank nodded. Tuppence turned it over carefully in her palms. This feels like it belonged to a larger piece, not merely a decorative trinket. My husband said the same once, the widow whispered. He believed it was part of a mechanism, though he never found what it belonged to. Tommy gently redirected the conversation. Mrs. Marchbank, did your husband ever work with coded notebooks, cipher systems, anything that might resemble a ledger written in symbols? The widow's brow creased. Yes. During the war, he helped a colleague catalogue stolen artifacts recovered from abandoned depots. They used cipher markings to avoid drawing attention. My husband said it was safer not to write straightforward descriptions. Tuppence's pulse quickened. A colleague? Do you know his name? I'm afraid I don't. My husband wouldn't speak much about those days, but he did say the colleague kept a notebook full of strange symbols. She paused. Why do you ask? Tommy looked toward the desk, where the torn page they'd received the night before lay hidden beneath a folder. We encountered something similar, he said carefully, a man claiming to have such a notebook. Mrs. Marchbank's fingers trembled. Was it stolen? Did he take it from someone? Tuppence and Tommy exchanged a measured glance. We can't say yet, Tuppence replied. But the man who visited you, the one with the cane, did he speak? Did he say anything at all? Mrs. Marchbank closed her eyes, reliving the moment. Only one sentence. He said, "It should be here." Then he stopped, as though he realized something was missing, and then he fled. The echo of those words seemed to settle into the room like dust. Tommy stood. Mrs. Marchbank, there is something we think you should see. Tuppence retrieved the torn warning from the desk drawer and handed it to the widow. Mrs. Marchbank stared at the handwriting, her face draining of colour. This is my husband's, she whispered. I would know it anywhere. Tuppence's voice softened. You're certain? Positive. My husband had an odd slant to his letters, angled, slightly downward. It's unmistakable. Tommy spoke gently. But your husband has been gone 6 months. Yes. Her eyes filled with sudden terror, which means either someone learned to imitate him, or he wrote this before he died. The room fell quiet. Tuppence felt a chill prickle along her arms, not from fear but from the clarity of a puzzle beginning to reveal its edges. Mrs. Marchbank, she asked slowly, do you believe your husband knew he was in danger? The widow's lips trembled. He said he felt watched, that shadows moved where they shouldn't. I thought it was the strain of work, museum politics. I didn't listen. Tommy knelt slightly so he could look her in the eyes. Did he leave any instructions, notes, anything hidden? Only that diary, she whispered, and it's no longer whole. Tuppence passed her a handkerchief. We will help you, but we need to safeguard the locket. Mrs. Marchbank nodded and placed it gently into Tuppence's hands. Please keep it safe. I have the dreadful feeling that it's the reason he was targeted. As the widow rose to leave, Tommy escorted her to the door. Tuppence watched her go, her grief like a thin veil barely concealing deeper fear. When Tommy returned, Tuppence held up the locket. Look at the hinge, she murmured. It was designed to lock into something. A case, a larger pendant, or perhaps a cipher device. Tommy examined it. It's not merely sentimental. No, Tuppence said quietly. It's a clue, an important one. She placed the locket on the desk beside the torn notebook page. The two objects seemed to hum with the same silent pattern, parts of a larger, unseen mechanism. It appears, Tuppence said, folding her arms, that Carraway isn't the only one playing games with us. Tommy looked at the door through which Mrs. Marchbank had vanished. And the deeper we go, he said, the more it feels like we're stepping into someone else's unfinished work. Tuppence tapped the locket gently, her eyes narrowing. Then we'd better finish it, she replied, before whoever's watching decides to finish us. The knock arrived with theatrical flair, 3 crisp raps, evenly spaced, like someone signalling the rise of a velvet curtain. Tuppence looked up sharply from the silver locket, which she had been studying for nearly 20 minutes, and narrowed her eyes. That, she said, is either a salesman with delusions of grandeur or Carraway. Tommy sighed, folding the torn notebook page back into its envelope. Let's pray for the salesman. I might actually buy something. But when he opened the door, Lucius Carraway swept into the office with the confidence of a man who believed all rooms improved upon his entry. His coat billowed slightly behind him, his moustache sparkled with some indefinably smug brilliance, and his cane tapped the floor as though addressing an audience. "Good morning, my dear apprentices," he declared, making a flourishing bow that set Tuppence's jaw twitching. "I have returned." "So we gathered," Tuppence said crisply. "Do shut the door. The draught might blow away your self-importance." Carraway obliged, dramatically, then glided toward the middle of the office, placing a gloved hand on the back of Tommy's chair. "Mr. Beresford," he said with exaggerated solemnity, "I am here to test you." Tommy blinked. "Test me?" "Yes. Test your mettle, your instinct, your aptitude. For too long you have languished in mediocrity, solving ordinary cases when you were destined for the extraordinary." Tuppence folded her arms. "You really must stop narrating your own legend. It makes people nervous." Carraway ignored her and reached into his inner coat pocket. With a flourish, he produced a stack of paper slips, torn, handwritten notes, each bearing a different symbol, number, or fragment of phrase. He tossed them onto the desk with the dramatic flair of a stage magician unveiling doves. "Behold," he exclaimed, "the fragments of a grand mystery." Tommy stared at the scattered slips. "These look like the ramblings of a man who owns too many pens." Carraway tisked. "Ah, Beresford, still inclined towards cynicism. But these," he gestured widely, "are clues, hints, pieces of a puzzle I have taken years to assemble." "And you're giving them to us?" Tuppence asked slowly. "Yes, to test whether you are worthy of learning the truth." Tuppence moved closer, her gaze drifting not to the papers but to Carraway himself, specifically to his eyes. They darted too quickly, too sharply, especially toward the cupboard where the Marchbank locket was stored. "You seem very interested in our office storage," she said. Carraway stiffened. "Nonsense." "Then stop staring at it," she replied coolly. He adjusted his gloves. "I merely observe everything. A proper investigator must." "A proper investigator," Tuppence countered, "doesn't leave cane marks on the floor." Carraway froze. Tommy followed her gaze. The cane tip, supposedly polished silver, had left tiny indentations in the wooden boards, each shaped with the precision of a metal pin rather than a decorative cap. Tommy knelt, examining one of the marks. "Your cane has a point, a sharp one. Why?" Carraway cleared his throat. "It is purely ornamental." "Or used for picking locks," Tuppence murmured. Carraway's smile flickered. Tommy stood. "All right, enough games. What do you really want? What are these clues supposed to prove?" Carraway's expression rearranged itself into something more serious. The theatricality thinned, leaving a hint of tension beneath. "Very well," he said quietly. "I will give you this much. You are not the only one searching." "For what?" Tommy asked. "For knowledge," Carraway replied. "For truth. For what remains hidden. There are others who want what someone possesses." "Someone?" Tuppence echoed. Carraway's gaze flickered again toward the cupboard. He leaned in. A word of advice: do not trust widows who arrive with trembling hands. Silence snapped across the room. Tommy's brow lowered. Mrs. Marchbank? I said nothing of names, Carraway replied lightly, the theatrics returning almost instantly. But if the glove fits— What do you know about her? Tuppence demanded. And don't dance around it. We've had enough ballet for one morning. Carraway smirked. One must not reveal everything at once. Mystery thrives on scarcity. Tuppence's tone sharpened. You're frightened, he stiffened. I? Frightened? My dear Mrs. Beresford. Oh, drop the act. It's wearing thin. Your eyes are giving you away. She stepped closer, her voice lowering. You're not here because you want to test us. You're here because you're running out of allies. Carraway looked as though she had slapped him with a velvet glove. Then he smiled, a thin smile frayed at the edges. You are perceptive, he admitted softly. Tommy lifted one of the scattered slips. It bore a drawing, a notation of curved lines intersecting a circle. This is from the same notebook you showed us yesterday, Tommy said. Isn't it? Carraway hesitated. Perhaps. We know someone else tore out a page, Tuppence added. Someone who warned us not to trust you. Carraway's eyes widened, but not with surprise, with calculation. Someone sent you a warning, he asked. They did, Tuppence replied. In handwriting, Mrs. Marchbank claims belonged to her late husband. For a moment, genuine shock pierced Carraway's composure. Then he recovered and straightened his coat. Well, it seems you have attracted attention. Tommy crossed his arms. If you want us involved, be honest. Tell us why you're really here. Carraway took a step back, but not out of fear, more like someone bracing himself before a confession. There is information in this notebook, he said quietly. Information people would pay dearly for. Information some would kill to keep hidden. And you have it? Tommy asked. Carraway's voice lowered. I have fragments, enough to worry certain individuals. Tuppence narrowed her eyes. And the locket? Carraway's moustache twitched, betraying him before he spoke. What locket? Don't insult us, she said. You've been eyeing the cupboard since you walked in. Carraway sighed, his bravado slipping again. Fine. Yes, I know of it. A piece of a mechanism once used to decode certain lists. Tuppence felt a cold thrill. A key. Precisely, Carraway said. An incomplete one. And Mrs. Marchbank? Tommy asked. Carraway paused. Grief changes a person, but ambition changes more. The remark hung in the air like a thread pulled tight. Before Tommy or Tuppence could question further, Carraway snapped back into theatrical mode. But enough gloom, he declared, producing an envelope from his coat and placing it ceremoniously on the desk. A token, a hint, a symbol. Tuppence eyed it warily. Open it. Carraway bowed. As you wish. He tore the envelope delicately and tipped its contents onto the desk. A single pressed flower slid out. It was small, pale, and unmistakable, a variety of early spring blossom grown in very few places. One of those places, Tuppence knew at once, was the Marchbank estate garden. She exchanged a look with Tommy. Their thoughts matched perfectly. Carraway had been there, or Mrs. Marchbank had given it to him. Thank you, Tuppence said calmly. You've told us more than you intended. Carraway stiffened. I have told you nothing. You've told us everything, she corrected, accidentally. Carraway's jaw tightened for the first time. You must proceed carefully. There are currents beneath the surface you do not understand. And what do you understand? Tommy asked. Carraway opened his mouth as if to answer, then stopped abruptly, as though some unseen leash tugged at him. I can say no more, he murmured. Not yet. Then he swept toward the door. I shall return when the time is right. He vanished down the corridor with the same theatrical precision he had entered. When the door clicked shut, Tuppence exhaled sharply. Well, I'm torn between throttling him and following him. Tommy sifted through the slips of paper. He's scared and trying desperately to hide it. Tuppence tapped the pressed flower. He's also been somewhere he shouldn't. Tommy crossed to the cupboard and retrieved the silver locket, placing it gently on the desk. Let's see what Carraway didn't want to say aloud. Tuppence held the locket up to the light, running her fingernail along the wide hinge. This isn't ornamental. Try the latch, Tommy suggested. She pressed lightly along the edge, and something clicked. The locket shifted, revealing a hidden panel no larger than a fingernail, just deep enough to hold a small object, a strip of microfilm or a folded cipher note. "It's hollow," Tuppence breathed. "Made to hide something." Tommy stared at the tiny compartment. "Which means someone wanted to hide something very important." Tuppence closed the locket slowly, her expression sharpening into resolve. "And someone else," she murmured, "is willing to kill to find it." The museum's back entrance was so unassuming that Tuppence walked past it twice before realizing the plain brick facade hid anything important. Tommy pressed the buzzer, which emitted a sound like a dying kettle, and after a considerable pause, the door opened a crack. A pale eye appeared, darted nervously between them, then the door swung wider. "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford?" the curator asked, voice tense. "I'm Mr. Sanderton. You wish to speak about the Marchbank materials." The corridor behind him smelled faintly of furniture polish and cold stone. Tuppence exchanged a meaningful glance with Tommy before stepping inside. Sanderton led them through a narrow passage, his footsteps brisk, as though speed might prevent unwanted questions. The storeroom was small, cluttered, and dimly lit. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, labels peeling, and a row of old cabinets lined the wall like aging sentinels. "Forgive the state of things," Sanderton murmured. "Mr. Marchbank was the organised one. We've been adjusting to his absence." Tuppence's tone was warm. "We're sorry for your loss. He must have been important here." Sanderton's shoulders tightened. "Very. He kept records others didn't bother with." Tommy allowed a moment of silence before speaking. "We understand his private safe at home was broken into." Sanderton's reaction was immediate. His mouth pressed into a thin line, his fingers drummed once on a crate. "I'd heard rumours," he said. "Shocking, absolutely shocking." Tuppence watched him carefully. His voice expressed sorrow, but his eyes expressed something closer to fear. "We're hoping," Tommy continued gently, "to understand what might have been taken, or targeted." Sanderton gestured toward a desk with an overflowing inbox. "Mr. Marchbank had his own indexing system. Much of it was ordinary, some less so." Tuppence wandered toward the row of cabinets. The middle one caught her eye. Its top drawer was locked, but the wood surrounding the keyhole bore tiny scratch marks, fresh and uneven. "Did someone try to open this?" she asked lightly. Sanderton froze. "Oh, that," he cleared his throat. "Probably just age. These old drawers stick. Someone must have forced it." Tuppence gave a small smile, pleasant, patient, and entirely unconvinced. Age doesn't usually leave scratches in symmetrical clusters. Sanderton's Adam's apple bobbed. Tommy approached, his tone amiable but probing. "Mr. Sanderton, we're not here to cause trouble, but someone has gone to great lengths to obtain Mr. Marchbank's research. If this drawer contains anything dangerous or valuable, you may be at risk." For a few seconds, Sanderton struggled silently with caution and conscience. Then he exhaled. "Mr. Marchbank was compiling a list," he admitted. "A very discreet one. Items rumoured to have been stolen during wartime chaos. Pieces brought back from transport depots, mislabelled, relabelled, some swapped entirely." Tuppence nodded. "And he believed he could trace the inconsistencies?" "He did." Sanderton hesitated. "But he also believed someone was watching him." Tommy exchanged a glance with Tuppence. "Someone with a cane?" Sanderton flinched. "So he told you?" "We guessed," Tuppence said. "Tall man, overconfident, enjoys theatrics." "And knows too much about locks," Sanderton murmured. "Exactly his words." Tuppence stepped closer. "Had this man been here?" Sanderton's hands tightened on the edge of the desk. "Once, months ago. Claimed to be verifying an archival discrepancy. Mr. Marchbank didn't believe him for a moment." Tommy asked quietly, "Did Marchbank say why he thought he was being followed?" "Because," Sanderton whispered, "he had begun to see patterns in the stolen lists, patterns that pointed to collectors who were still alive, wealthy ones, dangerous ones." Tuppence's attention drifted to a small glass vase in the corner. Inside it were pressed flowers, delicate pale blossoms identical to the one Carraway had dropped in their office. Her voice hardened. "Where did these come from?" Sanderton blinked. "Those? They were found among Mr. Marchbank's papers after he died. I assumed they were keepsakes from his home garden." Tuppence exchanged a sharp look with Tommy. Something connected, subtle but unmistakable. Caraway, Marchbank, the widow's garden, and now the museum. Tommy shifted gears. "Mr. Sanditon, may we see Mr. Marchbank's desk?" Sanditon reluctantly guided them to a cramped study space at the back. Marchbank's old desk was still arranged with tidy precision, pens aligned, folders stacked neatly, a magnifying glass resting atop a pile of notes. "Nothing here has been touched?" Tommy asked. "Only the basics. We keep it as he left it, mostly out of respect." Tuppence moved slowly around the desk, brushing her fingers lightly across its surface. Then she stopped. A faint indentation marked the wood, a small dot shaped like the tip of a metal pin. "Tommy," she murmured, "look." Tommy knelt. "The cane again." Sanditon paled. "He came back?" "Or someone else carrying a similar cane," Tuppence replied, "but given Caraway's recent antics, his presence feels likely." Sanditon swallowed. "Why would he return?" "For something he missed the first time," Tuppence said softly, "or to see if someone else had already found it." Tommy stood. "Did Mr. Marchbank ever show you a locket? Silver, engraved with a strange hinge?" Sanditon frowned. "A locket? No, but he once said a certain key, not a literal one, might unlock everything he'd discovered. Perhaps he meant a cipher tool." Tuppence lifted the small magnifying glass on the desk. "And this missing diary page, did he ever speak of what was on it?" "Not directly," Sanditon admitted, "but he hinted it contained the alignment sequence for decoding his list. Without it, the rest is meaningless." Tuppence and Tommy exchanged a long, loaded look. The locket wasn't sentimental, it was instrumental. Before they could probe further, the storeroom door creaked open. The three of them turned, but no one was there. Sanditon frowned. "I locked that." "Stay here," Tommy said quickly. He slipped into the corridor. It was empty, but the faintest echo of footsteps drifted from beyond the far door. Tuppence joined him. "He wasn't alone, Tommy. Caraway warned us. Others want the list. Others want the locket." Tommy's jaw tightened. "Then let's see who." They exited through the museum's front entrance into the daylight, scanning the pavement. At first, nothing appeared suspicious. Then Tommy noticed a thin man in a bowler hat standing too stiffly beside the lamppost across the street. He wasn't reading the newspaper he held. He was peering over it in their direction. Tommy stepped forward. The man bolted. "After him!" Tommy barked. Tuppence was already ahead of him. She darted across the street with the speed and precision of someone who had chased more than one runaway suspect in her lifetime. "Stop!" she called, not expecting compliance. The man veered sharply into an alleyway. Tuppence followed, her heels striking the stone in rapid rhythm. She cornered him beside a stack of crates. "Who sent you?" she demanded. The man's breath came in short, panicked bursts. I'm not armed." "Comforting," Tuppence said. "Name, now." He shook his head, eyes darting wildly. "I can't. I shouldn't have followed you." Tommy arrived, blocking the exit. "Then you're trapped. Talk." The man's shoulders slumped. "Caraway isn't working alone." Tuppence folded her arms. "We suspected that." "He's part of a network," the man gasped. "Collectors, buyers. They want the list, the whole thing, and they're close. They've already deciphered part of it." Tommy's eyes sharpened. "How much?" "A quarter, maybe more. Enough to know which items are real and which were switched. Enough to profit." "And what do they want with us?" Tuppence asked. The man swallowed. "You're interfering." "How flattering," she murmured. He darted suddenly to the side, shoving Tommy just hard enough to break past them. By the time Tommy regained footing, the man had vanished into the crowded street, but not before something fluttered from his pocket, drifting to the pavement. Tuppence bent and picked it up. "A train ticket," she said. "Ravenscar Point." Tommy exhaled. "Seaside town, quiet, out of the way." "Exactly where one conducts secret meetings," Tuppence said. She folded the stub and slipped it into her pocket. "Well, Tommy," she said, straightening, "it seems the next move is ours. And we're taking it to Ravenscar before anyone else does." The train hissed to a halt with the weary sigh of an old beast, and Ravenscar Point unfolded beyond the window, a jagged strip of coastline framed by dark cliffs and pale houses clinging to the land, as though uncertain whether to stay or slip into the sea. The station platform was nearly empty, save for a fisherman hauling a tangled net and a ticket boy too absorbed in his magazine to notice arrivals. Tuppence stepped down first and inhaled. "Salt and varnished wood," she murmured, like someone bottled the entire seaside and shook it. Tommy joined her, adjusting his coat. Picturesque and unsettlingly quiet. Perfect place for clandestine dealings. Or perfectly dull, Tuppence countered, depending on the company. They walked toward the main road leading into town, their footsteps softened by sand. Small cafes lined the street, shutters half drawn, windows glowing faintly with early evening lamplight. A gull circled overhead, crying out as if indignant at their presence. The guest house stood at the end of the lane, whitewashed and modest, with a narrow porch and a brass bell that chimed softly when Tommy pushed the door open. A woman in her 60s emerged from behind a counter, her expression equal parts welcome and wariness. "Rooms?" she asked. "Yes, 2, Tommy replied. "For the night." The woman studied them for a moment. "Londoners, aren't you? We don't get many this time of year." "Visiting," Tuppence said lightly. "A bit of fresh air." The woman made a humming sound that wasn't quite agreement. "Had another visitor a few days back. Well-dressed gentleman, carried a silver-handled cane, asked after quiet places in town." Tuppence and Tommy locked eyes. "Oh?" Tommy said mildly. "Yes, wanted to know which paths are less travelled. The cliff routes, the old signal station especially." Tuppence smiled pleasantly. "What a curious tourist." "That's what I thought. He looked more like he belonged in one of those glossy city magazines than a windswept signal tower." The woman handed them 2 keys. "Rooms upstairs. Breakfast early if you want it." They thanked her and carried their small bags up the steps. Once inside their modest adjoining rooms, Tuppence shut the door behind them. "Well," she said, leaning against it, "Carraway's been busy." Tommy opened his window slightly. A gust of cold sea air swept in. "He came here for a reason, and given the ticket stub, our shadow wanted us to come too." "Which means," Tuppence said, "we might be walking straight into someone's carefully laid plan." Tommy met her gaze. "Then we walk carefully." They left the guest house before sunset, following the old path toward the cliffs. The trail was narrow, flanked by gorse bushes that snagged at coats, and the crash of waves below echoed like distant thunder. As the sky shifted into hues of rose and grey, the abandoned signal station came into view, a squat stone structure perched on the cliff's edge, its roof partially collapsed, its door hanging crookedly on a single hinge. "Charming," Tuppence whispered. Tommy stepped inside first, sweeping his torch across the interior. The room smelled of dust and old salt. Footprints marred the floor, several sets overlapping. "Someone's been here," he murmured. "Recently," Tuppence added. She crouched, running a finger through a patch of disturbed dust. 2 sets of prints at least, one smaller than the other. They moved further in. A table lay overturned and a rusted lantern dangled from a hook. On a splintered section of wall, a strip of fabric clung stubbornly to a nail. Tuppence plucked it free. "Tommy," she breathed, "look at this." The scrap was unmistakable, flamboyant in pattern, luxurious in texture. "Carraway's coat," Tommy said, "or a very close copy." Tuppence tucked it into her pocket. "He's been here, and not long ago." Tommy's light swept across the far wall. Something glinted faintly. He approached, brushing aside grime to reveal a small rectangular groove. "A concealed compartment," he murmured. He pressed carefully along the edges until he felt a slight give. With a soft click, the panel shifted open, revealing a hollow space inside. Tuppence leaned in. "Anything?" Tommy reached in and withdrew a small reel, film, tightly wound, labelled with precise initials, E.M. "Marchbank," Tuppence whispered. "He hid something here." Tommy unspooled a portion carefully. The tiny frames showed ledger-style images, handwritten entries, brief glimpses of catalogued objects, dates, initials, not random, not innocent. "These are records," Tommy said quietly. "Transactions, exchanges, some legitimate, some absolutely not." "And collectors who shouldn't want their names on any list," Tuppence added darkly. She peered closer. One frame read transferred under cover, SM. Another, buyer disputes chain, RP. A third bore a symbol matching those in Carraway's notebook. Tommy, she whispered. Someone arranged illicit transfers and then tried to bury them. Marchbank was keeping evidence. And someone wants that evidence back. Tuppence glanced around. This place feels wrong, like we've stepped into the centre of a web. Which means we need to leave, Tommy said, before the spider returns. As if on cue, faint voices drifted from outside. Tuppence's breath caught. Someone's coming. Tommy extinguished the torch at once. The interior plunged into darkness. Hide, he murmured. They slipped behind a large rusted panel leaning against the wall, pressing themselves into the narrow space just as the soft scrape of footsteps approached the doorway. The station door groaned. A beam of light swept across the room. Carraway stepped inside, but he wasn't alone. A second light illuminated the doorway, revealing Mrs. Marchbank. Gone was her trembling demeanour, her timid grief. Her posture was rigid, her tone ice-cold. "You said the list would be here," she snapped. "You said you had everything arranged." Carraway, looking distinctly dishevelled compared to his usual flamboyant perfection, raised his hands in placation. "Patience, Eliza. Subtlety takes time. You can't rush these things." "We don't have time," she hissed. "The other buyers are already making offers. If we don't secure the full list, someone else will. I didn't go through months of pretending to be a fragile widow just to lose my advantage now." Behind the panel, Tuppence's eyes widened. "Pretending." Carraway's voice turned sharp. "You underestimated the Beresfords. They're not as gullible as you hoped." Mrs. Marchbank spat the words. "They were supposed to be distractions, nothing more. If you'd done your part instead of playing theatrical investigator..." Carraway stiffened. "I played my part. I stole what I could. But Marchbank hid things even from me." "So find the rest," the widow snapped. "Or I'll find someone who can." "Threats won't help," Carraway muttered. "Neither will incompetence." Tommy felt Tuppence's hand brush his. Even in the dark, he could sense the spark of fury in her eyes. Mrs. Marchbank continued, "If the Beresfords interfere again, I'll handle it personally." Carraway swallowed. "You wouldn't." "Don't test me," she hissed. A long silence followed. Then she turned sharply and strode out into the fading light. Carraway lingered, running a hand through his hair, muttering something lost to the crashing waves outside. Finally, he followed. Tommy and Tuppence remained motionless until the footsteps faded entirely. Only then did Tuppence exhale. "She played us," she whispered, "start to finish." Tommy nodded grimly. "And Carraway's been trying to survive it." They eased from behind the panel. "We have to leave," Tommy said. "Now." They slipped out the back entrance of the signal station, little more than a jagged opening where stone had crumbled, and found themselves on a narrow cliffside path. The ocean roared below, the wind sharpened, stinging their faces. The path wound upward toward the lighthouse road. "Careful," Tommy murmured. "This ground isn't stable." "Neither are our suspects," Tuppence replied. They climbed until the signal station disappeared behind the rocks. Only then did they stop to catch their breath. "We know too much now," Tuppence said softly, "and too little." Tommy touched the pocket where the microfilm lay. "The truth's hidden in here somewhere." "And the widow," Tuppence added, "isn't grieving, she's negotiating." Tommy looked back toward the path where the sea mist blurred the view. "The ground is shifting beneath us, Tuppence." "Yes," she whispered, "but we're still climbing." Together they turned toward the faint glow of town lights, the only safe direction in a landscape full of secrets. The train back to London rattled into motion with the determined clatter of something that refused to wait for good sense to catch up. Tuppence watched Ravenscar Point diminish into a grey cliffside smear behind them, her fingers drumming lightly on the armrest. "Well," she said at last, "I suppose we should send Mrs. Marchbank a sympathy card. Something tasteful. Condolences on your failed performance." Tommy gave a faint laugh, though his expression remained tight. "She fooled us thoroughly." "She fooled everyone," Tuppence corrected, "but she's playing in a den full of foxes now." "You think Carraway was telling the truth?" "I think Carraway was terrified," she said, "and that's usually the moment a liar slips into honesty." Tommy reached into his coat pocket, tapping the microfilm reel lightly. "We need answers. Real ones." And I know exactly where to start. Tuppence leaned closer. Major Swithin's old friend, the quiet one with the vulture-like eyebrows. He knows every private society from Kensington to Cairo. Tommy exhaled. Thomas Abernathy. Tuppence nodded. He'll tell us who's buying secrets these days, and who's killing to keep them. Abernathy lived in one of those London flats that smelled faintly of pipe tobacco, old maps, and academic suspicion. He let them in with a curt grunt, adjusting his spectacles as though regretting the cordiality. Marchbank's list, he said, once they'd explained. I knew he would dig himself into trouble. Always thought himself a crusader. Who wanted to stop him? Tommy asked. Abernathy's lips curved downward. A society of collectors. The Oriat Circle. Old money, quiet dealings, unpleasantly thorough. They had their hands in the acquisition of dozens of wartime artifacts, some stolen, some swapped, some salvaged from dubious sources. Tuppence tilted her head. Why would they want Marchbank's research? Because it could expose them, Abernathy replied matter-of-factly. Their reputations, their acquisitions, their entire sense of superiority. And where do Carraway and Mrs. Marchbank fit? Tommy asked. Abernathy waved a hand. Carraway, he's a nuisance but occasionally useful. People underestimate him, which is how he stays alive. As for Mrs. Marchbank, if she's involved, she's trying to sell the information to the highest bidder. Tuppence folded her arms. Which bidder? Abernathy sighed. Hard to say, but the circle isn't unified. Some members want the list retrieved, some want it destroyed, some want to buy it themselves. Internal conflict, Tommy murmured. Dangerous. Very, Abernathy said. And if you're planning to investigate further, you'll likely find at least one of them at tonight's charity auction. Tuppence blinked. Auction? Abernathy nodded. Fundraiser by the Kensington Art Society. Half the city's collectors attend. The circle hides in plain sight, always has. Tuppence's eyes gleamed. Then we'll hide in slightly plainer sight. The Kensington auction hall glittered beneath chandeliers like frozen waterfalls. Beside the entrance, a pianist played something festive that clashed spectacularly with the tension humming beneath the surface. Guests in luxurious evening wear drifted across the marble floor like colourful ships navigating polite seas. Tuppence adjusted her gloves, her expression bright with social innocence, the sort that convinced men to underestimate her from a distance and regret it up close. Remember, she murmured, we're charming, harmless, and possibly well-funded. Tommy straightened his tie. Speak for yourself. I'm aiming for neutral and forgettable. Perfect, she said. You'll blend in with the wallpaper. They split up. Tuppence drifted toward the exhibit tables, feigning interest in porcelain vases while her eyes scanned the crowd. She spotted the first signal, a gentleman tapping his cane lightly against his shoe. A subtle rhythm, barely noticeable, yet deliberate. Oriat Circle, member or messenger. The second sign, a folded auction paddle held not like an item but like a calling card. The third, a pressed flower pinned discreetly to the lapel of a tall woman in emerald silk. Tuppence's mind began weaving connections. Across the hall, Tommy cornered a nervous young clerk who seemed out of place amongst the sleek attendees. His hair stuck up in anxious tufts, and he clutched the auction catalogue like a life-preserver. "Excuse me," Tommy said lightly. "Do you work here?" The clerk jumped. "Yes. I mean, not usually, but I'm helping with catalogues tonight." Tommy lowered his voice. "My wife and I collect information, occasionally antiques. We've heard that some buyers send messages through catalogue markings." The clerk stiffened. Tommy smiled disarmingly. "Look, I'm not here to cause trouble. I simply need to know whether Mrs. Marchbank has been doing so." The clerk's eyes widened. "You know about her?" "Enough." The young man swallowed. "She's been sending coded notes all week. Small circles, cross marks, page folds, all addressed to the same buyer, a foreign one, very secretive." "Do you know the page numbers?" Tommy asked. The clerk hesitated, then nodded. "Pages 12, 16 and 24. Tommy opened a catalogue and scanned. Page 12 showed a painting attributed to a wartime transfer. Page 16 showed a bronze figurine once thought lost in France. Page 24 displayed an ornate frame known to have passed through several questionable hands. Tommy's pulse quickened. "Where's the frame?" The clerk pointed across the room toward a tall stand. "Lot 38. It goes up soon." Tommy thanked him and slipped back into the crowd. Tuppence intercepted him near the stage. "Well?" "She's been sending notes," he whispered, "coded, to an unknown buyer who's here tonight." Before she could respond, the auctioneer's gavel tapped for attention. "Lot 38, he announced, "a 19th century gilt frame of exceptional craftsmanship." The crowd murmured appreciatively. The frame, unremarkable at first glance, hung elegantly beneath a spotlight. Tuppence studied it. "Tommy," she said quietly, "there's something off about the back. Look at the way it bulges slightly." Before Tommy could answer, a shout erupted from the back. "Stop! That frame is compromised!" Heads turned. Chaos rippled through the hall. Carraway burst forward, waving his cane like a conductor leading a deranged orchestra. "Do not touch it," he cried. "I repeat, the lot has been tampered with." Security swooped in at once. 2 guards seized his arms. Tuppence stared in astonishment. He's either saving the day or destroying it. Tommy moved faster. "Carraway, what are you doing?" Carraway strained against the guards. "Behind the frame. Look behind it." The auctioneer hesitated. One of the assistants stepped nervously toward the piece, turned it, and peeled back the backing. Gasps scattered across the room. Tuppence leaned closer. "Tommy?" A scrap of paper was wedged behind the frame, yellowed, torn, handwritten, exactly like the diary pages Marchbank kept. The assistant unfolded it and went pale. This is part of a coded list," he said faintly. "You see," Carraway bellowed triumphantly. "I told you." Security dragged him toward the exit. As he passed Tommy, he locked eyes with him, gaze burning with urgency. "They're turning on her," he mouthed. Then he was hauled out into the corridor. Tuppence grabbed Tommy's arm. "Mrs. Marchbank?" "Someone in the circle wants her gone," Tommy said. "She's outlived her usefulness." "And someone else wanted us to see that fragment." They retreated toward the side of the hall as the auction dissolved into whispers. Tuppence replayed Carraway's words. "They're turning on her," she murmured, "which means she's no longer the highest bidder." "Or no longer trustworthy," Tommy replied. Tuppence felt a shiver, not from cold, but from clarity. "The circle isn't unified," she said. "They're fighting among themselves, and we just witnessed proof." She glanced at the dais, where the frame's fragment lay like an exposed nerve. "Someone planted that page," she continued. "Someone wanted Carraway to cause a scene. Someone wanted us to know that Mrs. Marchbank isn't the puppet master. She's a puppet losing her strings." Tommy nodded slowly. "Carraway wasn't manipulating us tonight. He was warning us." Tuppence exhaled. "Then we're in deeper waters than we thought." She slid her arm into Tommy's. "And the current," she said softly, "is starting to change direction." Tuppence did not often indulge in the pleasure of dramatic entrances. That was more Carraway's vice. But on this particular morning she felt entirely justified. She marched up the narrow path to Mrs. Marchbank's townhouse, lifted the polished brass knocker, and rapped 3 times with the decisive certainty of a woman with no intention of being turned away. The door opened a crack. Mrs. Marchbank appeared, wrapped in a soft grey shawl, her eyes carefully arranged into the tremulous expression of a grieving widow. "Oh, Mrs. Beresford," she whispered, "is everything all right?" Tuppence walked straight past her into the hallway. "Splendid," she said, "though I'm less concerned with my well-being than yours, or more accurately, your motives." The widow shut the door slowly. I don't understand." "Oh, I think you do." Tuppence removed her gloves with the air of someone preparing for surgery. "I've come to discuss your performance in Ravenscar Point." Mrs. Marchbank froze. Tuppence smiled pleasantly, the most dangerous expression in her repertoire. "You see, dear Mrs. Marchbank, Tommy and I happened to overhear your conversation with Mr. Carraway. Quite enlightening." The widow's trembling facade fell away like a curtain. Her posture straightened, her expression sharpened, cold and clear. "Well," Mrs. Marchbank said, "I suppose there's no point pretending now." "No," Tuppence said. "Do be honest. It's refreshing." The widow folded her hands. "Very well. What do you want to know?" "For a start," Tuppence said, "why the theatrics? All that grief, all that fear. You played the part beautifully." Mrs. Marchbank smiled faintly. "I am a widow. I merely leaned into the advantages of the role." And the list? Tuppence pressed. The diary page? The locket? My husband's work was mine as well, Mrs. Marchbank replied. Do you know how long I sat quietly beside him? How many nights I listened to him worry about ethics, provenance, right and wrong? He had principles, but principles don't pay bills. They don't protect you once you're alone. Tuppence raised an eyebrow. You believe you're entitled to the profits from stolen art? Mrs. Marchbank's eyes flashed. I'm entitled to a life, a secure one. My husband's research, our research, was the key. Carraway was meant to retrieve the missing pieces. Yet, he turned unreliable, Tuppence said thoughtfully. I wonder why. Mrs. Marchbank shrugged. He enjoys being clever and dramatic, but he fears the circle more than he fears failure. So do I. How comforting, Tuppence murmured. The widow stepped closer. Let me be clear, Mrs. Beresford. The Aureate Circle has placed a price on meddling. Walk away while you can. Tuppence's gaze hardened. I don't respond well to threats. Mrs. Marchbank's smile was thin as a razor's edge. A pity. Meanwhile, Tommy followed Carraway through Soho, a neighbourhood of narrow lanes, thick crowds and neon signs flickering like unreliable conspirators. Carraway moved with unusual haste, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. He wasn't the strutting peacock of earlier meetings. He was a cornered fox looking for holes in the fence. Tommy kept several paces behind, blending into the crowd. At last, Carraway ducked into a narrow alley flanked by shuttered shops and rubbish bins. Tommy waited 2 beats, then followed. Carraway spun, raising his cane defensively. Tommy Beresford, he gasped. Are you alone? For the moment, Tommy replied. Carraway lowered the cane, sagging against the wall. Good, good. They're everywhere today, watching, listening. Who? Tommy asked. The Aureate Circle, Carraway muttered. The same ones Marchbank feared, the same ones Mrs. Marchbank thinks she can outsmart. Tommy stepped closer. You need to explain. Properly this time. Carraway ran a hand through his hair, the motion unexpectedly vulnerable. I never meant harm, Beresford, truly. When I appeared at your office, I wasn't trying to manipulate you. I was trying to survive. By claiming you trained me, Tommy said dryly. Carraway winced. Forgive the embellishment. I needed your attention, and quickly. I needed help from someone with integrity, someone the Circle wouldn't suspect of dealing in stolen lists. Convenient, Tommy said. And the pressed flowers? Warnings, Carraway said, not signatures. I left them where I thought you might find danger before it found you. Tommy folded his arms. Start talking. The real story. Carraway exhaled deeply. The list Marchbank compiled isn't housed in a single notebook. It's encoded across multiple artifacts, tokens, trinkets, items that appear sentimental but aren't. That locket. It contains one segment. The signal station held another. The diary pages. More still. And the Circle wants the whole set, Tommy murmured. Carraway nodded. To destroy it, or control it. And Marchbank, both of them, knew that whoever held the complete list could expose the network or sell it for a fortune. Tommy looked at him sharply. Both of them? Carraway groaned. Mrs. Marchbank is far from innocent. She wanted to sell the list to a foreign buyer, someone vicious, someone who doesn't negotiate. Yet she pretended to be terrified, Tommy said. Carraway laughed bitterly. She's a better actress than I am. Tommy stared at him. So what now? Carraway straightened, a faint trace of his old bravado resurfacing. Now, we keep the code scattered. We protect those who can decipher it, or ensure they never reach the Circle. Tommy's jaw tightened. Tuppence is with the widow. Carraway paled. Back at the townhouse, Mrs. Marchbank walked towards the parlour, pausing at the doorway to glance back at Tuppence. You should leave, she said softly. Not until I'm satisfied, Tuppence replied. I have questions. And I have no more answers. Tuppence's voice took on a new firmness. You said the diary was yours by right. What makes you so certain? Mrs. Marchbank hesitated, a slight, telling pause. My husband and I worked together, she said. He recorded the entries, but I sourced many of the clues. I was part of it. Part of the wrongdoing, Tuppence observed gently. Mrs. Marchbank's mouth tightened. Do not moralize. You know nothing of being powerless. Tuppence's voice softened. I know desperation, but I also know choices. Yours were made long before your husband died. The widow's eyes narrowed. This conversation has ended. Not quite. Tuppence reached into her coat and produced the film reel she and Tommy had retrieved from Ravenscar. "Recognize this?" Mrs. Marchbank's control slipped. She stepped forward, hand outstretched. "Give it to me." Tuppence pulled it back lightly. "No." "You don't understand," Mrs. Marchbank hissed. "If I don't deliver the full set, the buyer will—" "Kill you?" Tuppence finished. "Possibly, but helping them would kill many more." Mrs. Marchbank stared at her, fury and fear warring behind her eyes. "You can't stop this," the widow whispered. "You and your husband are out of your depth." Tuppence smiled faintly. "We usually are, and yet, somehow, people underestimate us." Mrs. Marchbank's voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "Walk away, or you'll end up broken pieces on someone else's list." Tuppence took a step closer. "You mistake me for a woman who intimidates easily." The widow's facade cracked further, anger trembling beneath. "You think you can protect Carraway?" she scoffed. "The Circle will crush him. They're already turning on me. Do you imagine they'll spare you?" Tuppence's reply was cool. "I imagine we'll be an annoyance, and annoyances have toppled empires." Mrs. Marchbank's lips curled. "Then you're a fool." "And you," Tuppence said, turning toward the door, "are cornered." Without waiting for permission, she left, slamming the door behind her with a decisiveness she rarely indulged. Tommy and Carraway reached the townhouse steps at almost the same moment as Tuppence emerged. Her brows lifted. Convenient timing. Tommy hurried forward. "Are you all right?" Tuppence nodded. "Quite. Mrs. Marchbank, on the other hand, is about to discover that threats only work when you aim them at the right people." Carraway leaned heavily on his cane. "She's escalating. We must move quickly." "Then talk," Tuppence said. "All of it." Carraway glanced around the street, scanning for watchers, then whispered, "The private sale is tomorrow night. Mrs. Marchbank intends to offer the list, or what she believes is the complete list, to the foreign bidder. But she doesn't have all the pieces. You now have one. I have another. And the Circle controls the rest." Tommy exhaled. "So we're dealing with 3 factions, not one." Carraway nodded miserably. "And all of them will kill for control." Tuppence stepped closer. "What do we do?" "Protect the fragments," Carraway said. "Expose the widow, and stop the Circle from consolidating power." Tommy nodded. "And the sale?" Carraway's eyes widened. "We cannot let it happen." Tuppence's gaze sharpened. "Then we don't." She looked between them, Carraway trembling, Tommy resolute, and felt the pieces settling into place. "We must outmaneuver the widow, outwit the Circle, and keep this list scattered," she declared. "And we must do it before tomorrow night." Tommy extended his hand. "Tuppence," he said softly. "Ready?" She took it. "Always." Together they stepped into the fading daylight, allies against a widening storm, determined to stop a sale that could destroy everything. If secrecy ever had a palace built in its honour, it would have looked exactly like the townhouse on Belgrave Crescent. Its facade glowed with subtle golden light, not ostentatious but quietly confident, the sort of illumination that whispered old money, older influence, and the sort of activities that preferred chandeliers to daylight. Tuppence stood across the street, her gaze fixed on the entrance where guests flowed in soft waves, each invitation accepted by silent footmen dressed in midnight blue livery. "Quite a crowd," she murmured. Beside her, Carraway adjusted the lapel of his impeccably pressed coat, a miracle considering how rumpled he'd looked the day before. It seemed fear had inspired an unusual devotion to grooming. "These are not simply collectors," he whispered. "They are connoisseurs of leverage. Every man and woman inside would trade half their fortune for a secret, or use a secret to deprive someone of theirs." "And tonight," Tommy added, joining them, "they're bidding on absolute dynamite." The pendant, the locket reassembled into its true mechanical shape, would be the evening's unlisted prize. Mrs. Marchbank would bring it. Lord Penmarch would preside, and the aureate circle would gather like wolves around the carcass of truth. Tuppence lifted her chin. "All right, gentlemen. Remember the plan. We go in separately, blend, observe, and move when the signal comes." "Which is?" Carraway asked nervously. "The light's going out," Tommy said. Courtesy of an electrical panel Carraway swears he knows well. I do, Carraway said indignantly. I've staged far more dramatic exits than this. Tuppence allowed herself a tiny wry smile. Let's hope you can stage an entrance with equal flair. They crossed the street one by one, slipping into the flow of guests. Inside, the entrance hall opened into a magnificent oval salon. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead, their light refracting across marble floors and polished banisters. Guests moved like pieces on a chessboard, slow, deliberate, each assessing the other. A string quartet played from the mezzanine, its music soft enough to be ignored, yet imposing enough to command respect. Beneath it, murmured conversations wove through the room, carrying hints of deals, threats, and extravagant praise for objects that had undoubtedly changed hands under questionable circumstances. Tuppence drifted toward a table displaying a series of bronze figurines. Lord Penmarch himself stood nearby, a statuesque man with silver temples and an expression that suggested he was above boredom, but not above eliminating those who caused it. His gaze skimmed the room like a searchlight. Tommy positioned himself near the auctioneer's dais, pretending to study a catalogue. Carraway, more jittery than he cared to admit, lingered near a door that led to the service stairwell. From there, at precisely the right moment, he would trip the breaker. Tuppence's attention snapped to the entrance. Mrs. Marchbank had arrived. The widow was transformed. Gone were the soft dresses and timid expressions. She wore a sleek black gown that shimmered like lacquer, and around her neck hung the pendant, reassembled into an elegant geometric construction of silver panels and interlocking hinges, the mechanical heart of Marchbank's research, the key to the list. The crowd parted instinctively as she entered. Confidence suited her in a way grief never had. Lord Penmarch approached, bowing with exaggerated civility. "My dear Mrs. Marchbank, a pleasure." She inclined her head. "Shall we begin?" "Indeed," he replied. "Tonight's gathering is most eagerly anticipated." Tuppence moved closer. She caught Penmarch's voice, low, calculated. "The bidders are prepared. They expect discretion." Mrs. Marchbank's smile was cool. "They shall have what they expect, and what they deserve." Tuppence suppressed a shiver. The widow was playing with fire, and she knew it. Across the room, Tommy caught her eye. Tuppence gave the slightest nod. Not yet. They needed the right moment. As the quartet shifted into another melody, guests migrated toward the gallery where framed pieces hung along a velvet-draped corridor. Tuppence kept pace, drifting lightly, listening carefully. Words like provenance, acquisition, and transfer floated through the air like perfume. Behind her, a voice murmured, "They expect the full list." Tuppence froze, not visibly, but in the soft, controlled way a cat does when it hears a mouse behind a cupboard. Mrs. Marchbank again. She was speaking quietly with a tall gentleman in a charcoal suit. "I have what matters," the widow said. "The remaining fragments will be retrieved." "And if they are not?" the man asked. Mrs. Marchbank's tone dropped. "They will be, one way or another." Tuppence slipped away before she was noticed. She scanned the room for Tommy. He was already moving toward the service corridor. The signal time was close. Lord Penmarch strode onto the dais. The ambient chatter dimmed. A footman struck a handbell, soft but commanding, and the room settled into a hush. "Ladies and gentlemen," Penmarch began, "we gather tonight for a matter of utmost privilege." Carraway slipped through the service door. Penmarch continued, "While our formal catalogue is brief, I trust each of you is aware of the supplementary offering, a rare and precious artifact of considerable historical import." Tuppence's pulse quickened. Mrs. Marchbank placed her hand lightly on the pendant as though acknowledging the words. Penmarch raised his hand. And so, without delay, the lights went out. Darkness slammed into the room like a curtain crashing down. Gasps echoed. Glass shattered somewhere, a dropped drink or deliberate distraction. The quartet's music stuttered to a halt, one violin screeching a final note. Tuppence moved instantly, guided by instinct rather than sight. She lunged toward the faint glimmer where the pendant silver caught the last trace of fading chandelier glow. She seized it. Mrs. Marchbank's hand shot out fast as a striking snake. "Give that back," the widow hissed, her voice no longer modulated or refined, but wild, furious. Tuppence felt fingernails graze her wrist. She twisted, broke free, darted backward. But the widow was stronger than expected. She launched herself forward, grappling for the pendant with the desperation of someone fighting for her future. "You don't understand what you're doing," the widow snarled. "Oh, I understand perfectly," Tuppence replied, breathless, fighting to keep her grip. Across the room, Penmarch was no less violent. Tommy barreled into him just as the man tried to flee toward a side exit. Something metallic glinted in Penmarch's hand, the microfilm reel stolen from Marchbank's desk. Tommy tackled him, both crashing into a polished drinks table that toppled with a clatter. Chairs skidded, guests shrieked. Penmarch twisted, surprisingly agile, and struck Tommy's shoulder with his elbow. Tommy winced but held fast, wrestling the taller man toward the wall. "Let go," Penmarch barked. "You meddle in affairs beyond your comprehension." "I've heard that before," Tommy grunted, usually from men with something to hide. Elsewhere, Carraway leapt onto a table, his silhouette faintly visible in the confusion. "Ladies and gentlemen," he bellowed at full theatrical volume, "remain calm. Scotland Yard surrounds the building." "He's lying," shouted someone near the gallery. "Or is he?" Carraway boomed, brandishing his cane. "They're already inside." Chaos erupted. Guests surged toward exits. Footmen shouted instructions that no one heeded. A single gunshot cracked through the darkness, a warning shot fired by one of Penmarch's guards in panic, ricocheting harmlessly into the ceiling. The room froze. No one fell. Instead, a small scream followed. Mrs. Marchbank's. She released Tuppence and collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. Not wounded, not shot, shocked. Carraway stepped into the faint spill of emergency light now flickering on from the stairwell. He held his cane aloft, but it was no ordinary flourish. The silver tip had opened, revealing a hidden inner compartment. Nestled inside was the microfilm Mrs. Marchbank had planned to sell. "You stole it," Tuppence breathed. Carraway nodded solemnly. "Before she could use it." Mrs. Marchbank looked up, eyes wide with devastation. "You betrayed me." "I protected the evidence," Carraway corrected gently. "You chose the wrong allies, Eliza." Before she could reply, another sound cut through the confusion. Whistles, boots, a sharp command. "Scotland Yard! No one move!" Tuppence exhaled slowly, calmly, as uniformed officers poured into the room from both entrances. Tommy, still restraining Penmarch, gave a shocked laugh. "Carraway, you weren't lying." Carraway blinked. "I wasn't?" Tuppence stepped toward him, arching a brow. "I telephoned them anonymously before the auction began," she said, "just in case your theatrics fell short." Carraway stared at her as though witnessing a miracle. "Mrs. Beresford, you are extraordinary." The chandelier lights flickered back to life. In their glow, the truth lay plain. Penmarch detained, Mrs. Marchbank defeated, the circle in disarray, and Carraway, trembling, proud, ridiculous, holding the very evidence he had once pretended to steal. Tuppence looked at Tommy and allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. "Well," she murmured, "that was rather exciting." Tommy took her hand. "And it's not over yet." Morning sunlight slanted through the office windows in a soft, unhurried cascade, catching particles of dust that drifted lazily above Tuppence's freshly polished desk. The room felt calmer than it had in weeks. No frantic footsteps, no mysterious envelopes, no theatrical intrusions or coded lists tucked under teacups. Just the faint ticking of the wall clock and the scent of the tea Albert had left before slipping out to fetch biscuits. Tommy leaned back in his chair, savouring the rare quiet. Strange, isn't it? When there isn't someone lurking in a corridor or threatening to sell dangerous secrets, one almost forgets how peaceful the world can be. Tuppence straightened a stack of case notes. Peaceful worlds are for people who organise their offices properly. When you spend half your life looking for your own pen, adventure becomes a necessity. Tommy opened his mouth to reply, but a familiar tap, tap, tap sounded at the door. Not a timid knock, not a forceful pound, a dramatic, self-announcing rhythm. Carraway. He swept in as though expecting applause, but unlike his earlier entrances, his posture held something gentler, more tentative. His flamboyant coat was spotless, his silver cane polished to a mirror sheen, yet there was humility threaded through his expression. "My dear Beresfords," he declared, "I've come to return what is no longer mine." He reached into his inner pocket with a flourish, withdrew the silver locket, now harmless, emptied of its secrets, and placed it in Tuppence's hand. "For safekeeping," he added, "or symbolic closure, whichever you prefer." Tuppence arched a brow. "You seem remarkably unruffled for a man who narrowly escaped the collapse of an infamous clandestine society." Carroway pressed a hand to his chest. "My dear Mrs. Beresford, I am shaken to my very core, but a gentleman never lets the world witness his internal shattering." Tommy chuckled. "You're alive. That's the important part." "And wiser," Carroway added, marginally. He settled into a chair with less bravado than usual, folding his hands over the silver head of his cane. "I wanted to thank you," he said quietly. "Both of you. Without your intervention, I would likely be stuffed inside one of Penmarch's display cabinets as a cautionary exhibit." "Possibly labelled incorrectly," Tuppence murmured. Carroway gave her a grateful smile. "Precisely." They shared a small moment of levity before Tuppence's expression sharpened. "However, before we let gratitude soften our judgment, there is one matter to address." Carroway blinked. "Only one?" "Your outrageous claim," Tuppence said crisply, "that you trained Tommy." Carroway's mouth twitched. "Ah." Tommy folded his arms. "Yes, that. Care to elaborate?" Carroway sighed in a theatrical swirl. "If I must confess, I may have exaggerated certain elements of my professional legacy." "Exaggerated?" Tuppence repeated. "You essentially tried to rewrite history." Quite right," Carroway said quickly. "But allow me to explain. I was desperate, truly. I needed your assistance. And people often respond more readily when they believe destiny has wrapped a neat ribbon around an encounter." Tuppence snorted. "You thought claiming to be Tommy's forgotten mentor would encourage us?" "I thought," Carroway corrected, "that it might persuade you both to take me seriously. You must understand, my reputation has aged poorly. Once I was considered a genius in certain circles. Now I am dismissed as a relic, a flamboyant footnote." Tommy softened. "Carroway, you may be dramatic, but you're no footnote." Carroway's eyes glistened with theatrical sentiment. "You are exceedingly kind." "I'm being honest," Tommy said. "You infuriate people. You confuse them. You occasionally mislead them. But you came through when it mattered." Carroway waved a hand. Yes, in the moment of truth, even a peacock may act like a hawk." Tuppence hid a smile behind her teacup. "Just don't go around telling people you trained my husband." Carroway pressed a hand to his heart. "I swear it on every pressed flower I've ever left behind." "Which," Tuppence said dryly, "I hope you will stop doing." "No promises," Carroway murmured. Tommy straightened. "What will you do now? The circle is finished. Their influence is broken. Mrs. Marchbank will face consequences." Carroway drew in a steady breath. "I shall do what any reformed man does. Start anew. Turn respectable. Perhaps write my memoirs." Tuppence's expression flickered in horror. "Do change the names." "But, of course," Carroway said, rising with renewed elegance. "Though yours will be given more flattering pseudonyms." Tommy laughed. "Do us the favour of making them believable." Carroway extended his hand to each of them in turn, a gesture devoid of theatrics, surprisingly simple. "Goodbye, my friends," he said. "May your next adventure be less perilous." "We doubt it," Tuppence murmured. With a final bow, half mocking, half sincere, Carroway departed, leaving a faint trail of cologne and the curious impression of someone stepping out of a long-shadowed chapter of his life. The office fell quiet again. Tommy sank into his chair. Tuppence returned to her tidy stack of papers. For a moment, the simplicity of the scene felt almost surreal, as though the chaos of the previous days had been a fever dream. "Well," Tuppence said eventually, "that's that." "That's that," Tommy echoed. She poured tea for both of them, handing him a cup with an absent pat on his arm. He watched her reorganize a shelf of case folders with the careful precision of someone restoring order to a world that refused to stay orderly. "You know," Tommy mused, "truth is often stranger than fiction, especially when Carroway's involved." Tuppence considered this. "Truth is usually stranger. People think they understand themselves, much less others, but they rarely do. Some men create entire legends to disguise the rather ordinary truths beneath." "Some women," Tommy said, "see past the legends and read the footnotes." Tuppence's lips curved. Footnotes are where the good bits always hide. He sipped his tea, watching her slide a folder into place. Do you ever wonder, he asked, whether things would be simpler if we reorganized our lives the way you reorganize this office? Impossible, she said briskly. Life is messy. People are messy. Mysteries are messy. But an office, she adjusted a penholder, must never be messy. Ah, Tommy said, so mystery begins with knowing where everything belongs. Exactly, she replied. Once you know that, the rest reveals itself. He leaned back, smiling at the familiar comfort of her logic. I'm glad we do this together. Tuppence's expression softened. So am I. They sat in contented silence, the kind that comes only after triumph, shared danger, and the clearing of emotional dust. Outside, a delivery cart rattled past. A newspaper boy shouted headlines. The clock ticked. The world endured. And in a small office on a London street, Tommy and Tuppence Beresford, crime solvers, tea drinkers, and occasional chaos catchers, prepared for whatever curious, inconvenient, or unexpected mystery would next land on their neatly arranged desk.